Have you ever sat across the table from your grown child and thought, what are they really trying to say to me? Maybe they said something that felt cold, distant, or even disrespectful, but then, later that night, it stuck with you. Not because it was cruel, but because deep down, you felt it meant something more. You just couldn't quite put your finger on what. You're not alone. As parents, especially as we get older, our relationships with our children start to change in ways we're not always prepared for. They're not toddlers who need us to tie their shoes anymore. They're adults, navigating their own struggles, their own families, their own fears. And sometimes the way they show love doesn't look anything like the kind of love we're used to giving or receiving. But here's what I want you to know. Just because the words are different, just because the tone has changed, doesn't mean the love is gone. In fact, sometimes the things your kids say, the ones that might sting or confuse you, are actually their way of saying, I still need you. I still care, even if they can't say it directly. So today, I want to talk to you about 7 things your adult children might say that may seem like criticism, distance, or even disconnection, but are actually signs of love. And more importantly, I want to share how you can respond in a way that brings you closer, not farther apart. Let's start with a moment I know many parents over 60 have lived through. Your child calls you and they sound frustrated. Maybe they say, "You don't have to call me every day." Or they text back 2 words when you sent them a long message. It's easy in that moment to feel hurt, rejected, unwanted. Maybe you think, they don't care anymore. I'm just a burden. And your heart sinks. But let's slow that moment down and look at what might really be going on underneath. When a child says, "You don't have to call me every day," they're not necessarily saying, "Stop caring." What they might be trying to say is, "I'm overwhelmed. I'm trying to find space to breathe. But I still want you in my life. I just need a little room to be myself." It's hard to hear that as a parent, I know. Because reaching out is how we show love. But for them, needing space doesn't mean they don't love you. It might mean they love you enough to be honest, to ask for a different kind of connection that feels more manageable. Maybe they're working long hours. Maybe they're emotionally tired. Maybe they're learning how to balance being an adult without pushing away the people they care about most. And here's the part we sometimes forget. They may be struggling with guilt about it too. They may not know how to say, "I love you, I'm just tired." So it comes out as short replies or boundaries that feel like walls. Don't walk away from that. Don't take it as rejection. Take it as a sign they trust you enough to be real. Now let's talk about something else your child might say, something that can really hit hard when you're not expecting it. Maybe you're giving advice, trying to help them make a decision, and they snap back with, "I don't need you to fix everything." Ouch, right? That sentence can feel like a punch to the gut. Because as parents, fixing things is what we do. We've spent years kissing scraped knees, solving problems, making things better. So when they say that, it can feel like they're saying, "I don't want you anymore." But what if, just for a moment, we looked at it another way? What if what they're really saying is, "I want you to believe in me. I want you to trust that I can handle this. I need you, but in a different way than before." You see, love changes shape over time. It matures. And sometimes the most powerful way to show love is not by stepping in, but by stepping back, letting them fall a little, letting them figure it out, letting them know you'll be there if they ask. But you also believe in who they are becoming. When they say, "I don't need you to fix everything," it might be their way of saying, "I need you to see me not as your child, but as an adult who's still growing, still learning, but doing their best." That's not disrespect. That's a request for respect. Here's another one that might feel familiar. Maybe your child says something like, "I don't want to talk about that right now." You bring up the past, or an old family issue, or even ask about their feelings, and suddenly they shut down. Quiet, cold. You might think, "Why won't they open up to me? Did I do something wrong?" But here's a truth that's hard to see in the moment. Silence can be a form of protection. And not just for them, but for your relationship. Sometimes when a child avoids a hard conversation, it's not because they don't love you. It's because they're afraid. They might say something they can't take back. Something that would hurt you, or hurt the bond you share. By saying, "I don't want to talk about it," they might be trying to protect the relationship, not push you away. It could mean they're not ready. It could mean they're still working through their own feelings. But underneath it all, it could mean, "I care too much about us to risk saying the wrong thing. And I know what you might be thinking, but I want us to talk things out. I want us to be honest." That's fair. You deserve that too. But sometimes, timing matters. And by respecting their timing, you build something even more powerful: trust. You're showing them that love doesn't have to come with pressure, that your presence is steady, even when the words aren't there yet. Now let's take a breath for a second. I know this is a lot. These moments with our children, especially when they're grown, can feel like walking a tightrope. One wrong word, and everything can feel off balance. And it's hard not to take things personally, especially when we've poured so much of ourselves into raising them. But I want to gently remind you of something. If your child is still talking to you, even in difficult ways, even with boundaries, even with silence, they're still reaching for connection. They haven't walked away. They're trying to rewrite what that connection looks like in a way that works for them as adults. That's not rejection. That's love in a more complicated, grown-up form. You might not always recognize it right away. It might come dressed as frustration. It might sound like distance. But underneath it all is a heart that still remembers being held by you. A heart that, even if it can't say the words clearly, still feels safer knowing you're there. And that's something powerful. Because as much as our children grow, as much as the world changes, one truth remains: they never stop needing love. They just need it in new ways. And your presence, your quiet strength, your willingness to listen without fixing, your ability to stay when it's hard, that's the kind of love that stays with them long after the conversation ends. So, if you hear your child say one of these things, pause, breathe, look past the words, and don't walk away. Because beneath the surface, something beautiful might be trying to grow. Now, let's continue. There's something else your child might say that can catch you off guard. It might be in the middle of a conversation, or maybe after you've shared something personal with them. It might say, "You never did that for me when I was growing up," or "I needed more from you back then." Those words can feel like someone's reaching back in time and picking at old wounds you didn't even know were still open. And for many parents, especially those in their 60s or 70s, it's devastating to hear. Because you tried your best, you sacrificed, you worked hard, gave what you had, and made choices based on what you thought was right at the time. So when a grown child says something that sounds like criticism of your parenting, it's easy to feel judged, maybe even unappreciated. But here's the deeper layer we often miss. When your child brings up the past, it's usually not because they want to hurt you. It's because they're trying to heal. They're trying to understand themselves better. And part of that process, part of growing into a whole, emotionally aware adult, is going back to where the roots were first planted. That includes their childhood. So when they say, "You didn't protect me," or "I wish you had listened more," it's not always a blame game. Sometimes it's a way of saying, "I want to be closer to you now. but I need you to see the whole me, past and present, so we can build something real going forward. It's not rejection, it's a request. A quiet, vulnerable ask. Can you still love me, even with the hurt I carry? And maybe, can I still love you while I process mine? That kind of honesty isn't easy, for them or for you. But it's love. Raw, uncomfortable, sometimes clumsy. But it's love trying to break through old patterns. And here's where your role becomes so powerful. Not as the fixer, not as the defender, but simply as the one who listens and stays. The one who doesn't shut the door when the conversation gets hard. The one who says, I hear you. I didn't know you felt that way. Thank you for telling me. That one moment of open-hearted response can change the entire relationship. Because here's the truth. When your children open up like that, they're not just telling you about their pain. They're inviting you into their healing. And that's sacred ground. Let's move to something a little more subtle now. Have you ever had a conversation with your child where you offered to help? Maybe it was money, or time, or a suggestion, and they replied with something like, I'll figure it out? At face value, that sounds like they don't want your help, that they're brushing you off. But if you look closely, you might notice something different in the tone. Not dismissiveness, but determination. Not coldness, but effort. Because what they might be trying to say is, I want to prove I can stand on my own, but it means the world to me knowing you're there if I fall. It's the grown-up version of learning to ride a bike. They don't want you holding on anymore, but they still want to know you're on the sidewalk, watching, cheering them on. And here's the beautiful part. Even when they say, I'll figure it out, they rarely stop wanting to share the outcome with you. Once they've navigated the challenge, they often come back with a story, a lesson, a reflection. They want you to be proud of them, not just for succeeding, but for trying. And your steady, supportive presence gives them the confidence to keep trying. So when you hear, I'll figure it out, don't hear, I don't need you. Hear, I'm learning to trust myself, and your belief in me makes that possible. Now here's another one that might sound almost too simple. I'm busy, or this week's been crazy. These short replies, especially when you've been looking forward to a phone call or hoping for a visit, can feel dismissive. You might sit there wondering, am I just not important anymore? But take a breath. Think about the times in your life when everything felt heavy. When you were juggling work, bills, kids, marriage, or health. Remember those days? When sometimes even returning a phone call felt like a mountain to climb? Your child might be in that season now. And if they're saying, I'm busy, what they might be really saying is, I'm doing my best, but I don't want you to feel like I'm ignoring you. They may not know how to say that clearly. They may not know how to balance everything yet. But even in the rush of life, you're still on their mind. You can tell by the way they send a text late at night after a long day, or the way they check in after a few days of silence. That might not be the kind of attention you want, but it could be all they have to give in that moment. And it still means something. Because here's the heart of it. When people are truly indifferent, they don't say anything at all. Silence with no follow-up. Distance with no return. But your child? They're still reaching, even if it's a short message or a delayed call. That's not absence. That's effort, in the middle of exhaustion. Don't walk away from that. Don't tell yourself the lie that you don't matter, because you do. And when you respond with kindness instead of guilt, with patience instead of pressure, something powerful happens. You become a safe place for them, a grounding force. The one person who loves them without making demands they can't meet. That kind of love, it sticks with them. Even if they don't say it, they feel it. And eventually they'll show it, in their own way, in their own time. Now, before we continue, I want to take a moment to say something that every parent needs to hear. If you're struggling with any of this, If these conversations with your kids have left you feeling confused or hurt, or like you're walking on eggshells, you're not failing. You're learning, and so are they. This stage of life, the one where your kids are adults and you're figuring out a new way to connect, it doesn't come with a rule book. You're both doing your best, and that's enough. It's not about being the perfect parent anymore. It's about being a present one. And if your child is showing up, even in messy ways, if they're saying things that feel hard but honest, if they're trying, even just a little, then something meaningful is still there. Something worth holding on to. Because love between parents and adult children doesn't always look like hugs and long phone calls. Sometimes it looks like patience, like letting them grow, like staying open, even when the words don't come out right. And that's exactly what love looks like when it's maturing, not fading. So let's keep going. There's another phrase your child might say that seems simple on the surface but carries more weight than it first appears. They might say, "I'm trying," just 2 words, maybe spoken after a disagreement, maybe after you've asked them something important and they couldn't give you the answer you were hoping for. And at first it might sound like an excuse, a way of dodging responsibility or avoiding the deeper conversation. But more often than not, that short sentence is actually a quiet confession. It's a way of saying, "I know I'm not showing up the way I should. I know you need more from me, and I'm not there yet, but I haven't given up." Those words, "I'm trying," can be a sign of inner struggle, of wanting to do better, be better, but feeling overwhelmed by the weight of everything going on. Maybe they're trying to balance work and family. Maybe they're wrestling with anxiety, regret, or just the fatigue that comes from growing older in a world that never slows down. So when they say they're trying, believe them. Not because you see the results right away, but because effort, even invisible effort, matters. It's a step. And in relationships, especially ones that have weathered time and tension, those small steps are how healing begins. You may not get the grand gestures. You may not hear, "I love you" in every conversation. But when someone says, "I'm trying," what they're really saying is, "You still matter to me. I haven't walked away." That matters more than you might realize. And finally, there's one more thing your child might say that's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. It might come in a soft moment, or maybe at the end of a phone call. They might say, "Thanks for checking in," or "I appreciate you always being there." It's not elaborate. It's not a big emotional scene. But in those words is something sacred, acknowledgement. Because let's be honest, parents don't always get thanked. So much of your love is silent, behind the scenes. The kind that shows up in worry, in prayers, in checking the calendar to remember birthdays and anniversaries. The kind of love that keeps giving, even when it's not always received in the way you hoped. So when your grown child says something like, "Thanks for always being there," hold on to that. Let it sink in, because that's them seeing you. That's them recognizing the quiet strength you've carried for decades. That's them saying, "I know I haven't always said it, but I notice." And that kind of moment, that's love. Real, grown-up, quiet love. Sometimes it won't come through big words or hugs or long talks on the porch. It comes in those small acknowledgments, those brief glimpses of tenderness. And if you can see them for what they are, they'll mean more than any bouquet of flowers or store-bought card ever could. Now, I want to pause and say something to you. Not as a script, not as advice, but from one human heart to another. You've made it here, through decades of parenting, of living, of learning, of trying. You've seen holidays with empty chairs. You've worried through long nights. You've watched your kids grow into people with their own minds, their own wounds, their own ways of loving. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to know where you fit in their lives now. It's hard when they don't call as often, or when they say things that sting. It's hard when the love you gave so freely isn't always returned the way you hoped. But I want you to know something. Your presence still matters, more than you know. Your patience teaches them peace. Your steadiness teaches them trust. Your listening ear, your calming voice, your refusal to give up, even when things get distant or complicated, that teaches them what love looks like when it grows up. You may not be the center of their world anymore, but you are still the root, the place they come from, the reason they keep trying to figure out how to love, even when they don't get it right. Because whether they say it clearly or not, whether they say it often or rarely, they love you. Deeply, imperfectly, differently than when they were 5 or 15, but maybe even more so. And you don't have to be perfect now either. You don't have to have all the right responses. You don't have to pretend you're not hurt when something stings. All you have to do is stay open. Keep your heart soft. Let the door stay cracked, even if you're not sure they'll walk through it. Because love at this stage of life isn't about fixing. It's about being, about showing up, about letting your presence be enough. So if your child tells you something hard, if they say they're busy or need space or bring up the past, or even lash out with frustration, take a breath. Try not to walk away. Look for the love beneath the words. Look for the effort, the trying, the late-night texts, the short replies that still mean, "I'm thinking of you." Because those moments, when you choose to stay, not out of obligation, but out of understanding, that's when relationships heal. That's when something broken becomes something strong. And if you're feeling unsure right now, unsure of where you stand, unsure of whether you're still needed, still loved, I want you to remember this. You are. You've given love in ways that shaped someone's whole life. And even if that love wasn't always received perfectly or returned right away, it still matters. It still echoes. It still lives in the heart of someone who's learning to love you back, in their own way and in their own time. So keep showing up. Keep being kind. Keep leaving space for reconnection. Because sometimes love doesn't sound like, "I love you." Sometimes it sounds like, "Thanks for being patient with me," or "I'm trying," or even just, "Hey, how are you?" Those aren't small things. They're the beginning of something deeper, something that grows stronger because you didn't walk away. And one day when they've had time to grow into their own version of love, they may look at you and say the words you've been waiting to hear, not because they were pressured, but because they were ready. And you'll know, you didn't just raise a child. You raised someone brave enough to love you back, even through the hard parts. So thank you for being that kind of parent. The kind that stays, the kind that forgives, the kind that keeps the light on even when the path is uncertain. Here's to you, to the quiet heroes of love, to the parents who still believe in connection, even when it gets complicated. If this message touched you, I hope you'll leave a comment and share your story. Let us know how you're navigating this season of life. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life, where we talk about real love, real family, and how to keep growing at any age. Because your story isn't over. And love, it's still here. Here's to living your best life, with heart, with courage, and with connection.